Symphony of Silence. The concert hall echoed with Benedict Fraser's thunderous disapproval. At 42, he was the youngest principal conductor the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra had ever appointed, and arguably the most demanding. Again, second. Violins, you're dragging behind. This is Tchaikovsky, not a funeral march. Benedict tapped his baton sharply against the stand, his steel-gray eyes scanning the orchestra until they settled on a figure in the second row. Ms. Jenkins, perhaps you could actually watch the conductor rather than your sheet music? That's generally how orchestras function. Nora Jenkins, 34 and 13 years into her position with the orchestra, nodded silently. Her fingers, calloused from decades of playing, tightened almost imperceptibly around her violin. "Yes, maestro," she said, her voice barely audible over the rustling of sheet music around her. "From measure 87, Benedict commanded, raising his baton. Again, the rehearsal continued for another grueling hour. Benedict had been appointed 6 months ago after the retirement of their beloved previous conductor, and the transition had been anything but smooth. Where Maestro Ogilvy had been gentle and encouraging, Benedict demanded perfection with cold precision. After rehearsal, the musicians dispersed quickly, eager to escape Benedict's critical gaze. Only the first chair violinist, Dominic Rivera, lingered to speak with the conductor. "Drinks tonight, Ben? A few of us are heading to Allegro's," Dominic suggested. They had known each other since Juilliard, a fact that rankled some orchestra members who suspected favoritism. "Perhaps," Benedict replied, organizing his scores, "though I've mountains of work before Thursday's performance." As they spoke, neither man noticed Nora quietly packing her violin in its case. She moved with an economy of motion, as if trying to occupy as little space as possible. "Jenkins is still struggling with the third movement," Benedict muttered, just loud enough for Nora to hear. "I don't understand how Ogilvy tolerated such mediocrity." Nora's fingers stilled momentarily before continuing to secure her instrument. Her face remained impassive, a skill she'd perfected over years of similar comments. "Nora's reliable Ben," Dominic said with a shrug. "Not everyone can be a soloist," Benedict scoffed. "Reliability without excellence is pointless. This is the Philadelphia Symphony, not a community orchestra." Nora slipped away without a word, her sensible shoes making no sound on the polished floor. Outside, autumn air bit at her cheeks as she walked briskly toward the subway station. Her apartment in South Philly was modest, but close to a small music school where she taught children 3 evenings a week, a fact none of her orchestra colleagues knew about. At home, Nora unwound her practical bun, letting chestnut hair fall past her shoulders. She moved to the small upright piano in her living room and sat, closing her eyes. Her fingers began to dance across the keys, playing not Tchaikovsky, but her own composition. Complex, emotional music that flowed from somewhere, deep within her. Here, alone, Nora transformed. Her posture straightened, her expression intense with passion that never showed during rehearsals. For 2 hours, she played and adjusted the notations on manuscript paper beside her. This was her 7th composition, though no one had ever heard the previous 6. Meanwhile, Benedict dined alone at his penthouse overlooking Rittenhouse Square, reviewing the orchestra's upcoming season. The Philadelphia Symphony was his stepping stone to greater things. Berlin, Vienna, New York. He couldn't afford any weak links. He paused on Nora Jenkins's personnel file. 13 years in the second violin section. Excellent attendance. No incidents. No solo performances. Nothing remarkable whatsoever. Benedict closed the file with a sigh. Some musicians were simply background players, necessary but forgettable parts of the greater whole. Nora Jenkins, he decided, was definitely one of them. Neither Benedict nor Nora realized that in 3 days, everything would change. Crescendo of discovery. The crisis struck 40 minutes before curtain call. Benedict paced the green room, phone pressed to his ear. What do you mean Francesca can't perform? She's our concert master. His free hand clenched into a fist. Food poisoning. Tonight, of all nights? In the adjoining room, musicians exchanged nervous glances. The Philadelphia Symphony was hosting the governor and several potential major donors. This performance of Tchaikovsky's violin concerto would determine their funding for the next season. Dominic approached Benedict as he ended the call. I can step in as concertmaster, but we need a soloist for the concerto. There's no time to bring in anyone external. Benedict ran a hand through his meticulously styled hair. This is a disaster. The concerto is the centerpiece of tonight's program. I could attempt it, Dominic offered hesitantly, though I haven't performed it in years. That's not good enough, Benedict snapped. Not for this audience. The room fell silent. Musicians averted their eyes, not wanting to volunteer for potential public humiliation. Benedict surveyed them with growing desperation. In the corner, Nora sat quietly, reapplying rosin to her bow. She wore the standard black concert attire that rendered orchestra members nearly identical from a distance. Her gaze remained fixed on her violin, seemingly oblivious to the crisis unfolding. What about Peterson from the first violins? Benedict suggested to Dominic. On paternity leave, Dominic replied. Richardson? Not technically proficient enough for the cadenza. As they debated increasingly implausible solutions, a soft voice interrupted. I can play it. Benedict turned to find Nora standing nearby, violin held carefully at her side. He stared at her with undisguised disbelief. You? The Tchaikovsky concerto? Yes, she said simply. Several musicians exchanged skeptical glances. Benedict's laugh was short and dismissive. Ms. Jenkins, this isn't the time for jokes. This concerto is one of the most technically demanding in the repertoire. I'm aware, Nora replied, her voice gaining a subtle strength. I've been playing it since I was 15. Benedict studied her face, searching for signs of delusion or misplaced confidence. He found only calm certainty in her hazel eyes. Ben, Dominic interjected quietly. We don't have options. Benedict checked his watch. 34 minutes until. Curtain. Fine, he said tersely. Play the opening, now. Nora nodded and raised her violin. Without warming up, without hesitation, she began to play. The first notes rang through the room with startling clarity. Benedict's expression shifted from skepticism to shock as Nora's fingers flew across the fingerboard with astonishing precision. The passionate Russian melody soared from her instrument with an emotional depth that made several musicians stop their preparations to listen. When she paused after the introduction, the room was completely silent. Where did you learn to play like that? Benedict demanded. Curtis Institute, Nora answered. I studied with Mikhail Sorokin. Benedict's eyes widened. Sorokin was legendary, a master who taught only the most promising talents. Why are you in the second violins? Something flashed across Nora's face. Pain, perhaps, before she composed herself. It's where I belong, she said simply. There was no time for further questions. Benedict made his decision. Dominic, take concertmaster. Ms. Jenkins will play the solo. 30 minutes later, the audience settled into their seats. The governor and his entourage occupied the front row. Benedict stepped onto the podium, his customary confidence masking inner turmoil. He had built his reputation on control and perfection. Tonight, he was gambling everything on a second violinist he'd barely noticed for 6 months. The orchestra began the introduction, and Benedict watched Nora walk to the soloist position. She looked different somehow, her posture straighter, her movements more deliberate. When she placed the violin under her chin, she closed her eyes briefly as if centering herself. Then she began to play. The first notes made Benedict's breath catch. Nora's sound was transformative. rich and vibrant, technically flawless yet profoundly emotional. Her interpretation wasn't just competent, it was revelatory. She played with the passionate abandon of someone who understood Tchaikovsky's soul, who could translate his longing and joy directly through her fingers. In that moment, Benedict saw her truly for the first time. The plain, quiet woman who had blended into the background was gone. In her place stood an artist of extraordinary power, commanding the music and the audience with subtle authority. Throughout the performance, their eyes met repeatedly as Benedict conducted. Each time he found himself drawn deeper into the mystery of her. How had he missed this? How had he dismissed her so completely? As Nora approached the cadenza, the most difficult solo passage, Benedict held his breath. She closed her eyes and launched into a display of virtuosity that left the audience spellbound. Her fingers moved with impossible speed and precision, drawing sounds from the violin that seemed to transcend the instrument itself. When the final, triumphant chord resounded through the hall, there was a moment of stunned silence before the audience erupted into a standing ovation. The governor was on his feet, beaming. Nora stood center stage, her cheeks flushed but her expression serene. When Benedict extended his hand to acknowledge her, their fingers touched briefly. The electricity of that moment, of shared musical communion, startled them both. As they took their bows, Benedict leaned close to her ear. "Who are you, Nora Jenkins?" he whispered. She turned to him with the ghost of a smile. "Exactly who I've always been, Maestro. You just weren't listening." Intermezzo of understanding. The morning after the performance, Benedict arrived at the concert hall earlier than usual. His mind had replayed Nora's performance throughout a restless night, each recollection raising more questions. How had such extraordinary talent remained hidden in plain sight, and why? He found her in one of the small practice rooms, working through a Bach partita. Benedict paused in the doorway, observing unnoticed. Her technique was impeccable, economical yet expressive, with a tone that made the modest room feel like a cathedral. "Good morning, Ms. Jenkins," he finally said. Nora lowered her violin, looking unsurprised by his presence. "Maestro, did you need the room?" "No." Benedict stepped inside, closing the door. "I wanted to speak with you about last night." "The governor called this morning," she said, carefully placing her violin in its case. "He's pledging double the funding we hoped for." "I'm not here about the funding." Benedict took a seat across from her. "You saved the concert. I owe you an apology for my previous assessments of your abilities." Nora met his gaze steadily. "Thank you, but it's unnecessary. I'm comfortable in the second violin section." "That's what puzzles me." Benedict leaned forward. "You studied with Sorokin. Your technique is world-class. You could be concertmaster of any major orchestra, perhaps even a soloist. Why hide in the background?" Something in her expression closed. "Not everyone wants the spotlight, Maestro." "Benedict," he corrected. "Please. After what you did for the orchestra, I think we're past formalities." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "Benedict, then." "Have coffee with me," he said, surprising himself with the invitation. "There's a cafe around the corner." 30 minutes later, they sat by a window overlooking Spruce Street, steam rising from ceramic mugs between them. Nora added a precise teaspoon of sugar to her coffee, stirring methodically. "I researched you last night," Benedict admitted. "You were a prodigy. There are recordings of you performing Paganini at 17. Critics called you the next Hilary Hahn." Nora's eyes flickered to the pedestrians passing outside. "That was a different lifetime." What happened? She was quiet for so long that Benedict thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "I was 21, just beginning my solo career. I had a major debut scheduled with the Chicago Symphony." She traced the rim of her mug with one finger. 3 weeks before, my younger sister Olivia was diagnosed with leukemia. Our parents had died years earlier, so it was just us. Benedict felt a tightness in his chest. You canceled the performance? And the European tour that would have followed. Nora nodded. Her treatment was intensive. She needed someone there every day. Music became secondary. For how long? 3 years, Nora said. She recovered, thankfully. She's a pediatric oncology nurse in Boston now, working with children, going through what she did. Benedict tried to imagine sacrificing his career at its pinnacle moment. The thought was almost incomprehensible. But afterward, you could have resumed your trajectory. I tried, Nora admitted. But something had changed. The spotlight felt wrong, empty. I'd spent 3 years playing only for my sister in hospital. Rooms, seeing how music could heal in intimate spaces rather than grand halls. She looked up at him. Do you know what Olivia said during her darkest moments? That my playing was the only thing that made her forget her pain? Benedict was silent, absorbing this. After that, playing for critics and status seemed hollow, Nora continued. I took the position with Philadelphia because it allowed me to be part of something meaningful without the pressure of being the center of attention. And it gave me time to teach children and compose my own music. You compose? Benedict asked, fascinated by each new revelation. A faint blush colored her cheeks. It's a private passion. Would you share some of your work with me? When she hesitated, he added, as a colleague, a fellow musician. Perhaps someday, she said, non-committally. They spoke for nearly 2 hours. Benedict learned that Nora taught violin to underprivileged children 3 evenings a week, that she volunteered monthly at a hospice center playing for terminal patients, that she spoke 4 languages and had synesthesia. She saw colors when she heard certain musical phrases. With each revelation, Benedict's perception shifted. The plain, forgettable second violinist was dissolving before his eyes, replaced by a woman of extraordinary depth and complexity. Why did you step forward last night? He asked. You've avoided attention for 13 years. You could have remained silent. Nora considered the question carefully. The music deserved to be played properly, and the orchestra needed those donors. A pause. Also, I suppose I was tired of your dismissal. Benedict winced. I was arrogant and blind. You were. Focused on excellence, she countered. That's not entirely wrong, but I defined excellence too narrowly, he admitted. I saw only what was visible on the surface. As they walked back to the concert hall, Benedict found himself hyper-aware of her presence beside him. The careful way she moved, the subtle confidence beneath her modest demeanor. How had he missed seeing her for so long? There's a chamber music series next month, he said as they reached the building. Would you consider performing the Mendelssohn Octet with selected members? As first violin? Nora paused at the entrance. You don't need to overcompensate, Benedict. I don't require special treatment. It's not special treatment, he insisted. It's proper utilization of the orchestra's resources. You're extraordinary, Nora. The audience deserves to hear you. She studied his face, as if searching for ulterior motives. I'll consider it, she finally said. Benedict watched her walk away, struck by the strange sensation that he'd discovered. Something precious and rare, a diamond that had been sitting, unnoticed, within arm's reach all along. That evening, for the first time in years, Benedict didn't review scores or plan rehearsals. Instead, he searched online for Nora's early recordings, listening to her 17-year-old self play with breathtaking passion. Then he sat at his piano and began to compose, something he hadn't done since his student days, letting the inspiration that Nora had unknowingly awakened flow through his fingers. Neither of them realized they had begun writing a new movement in their lives, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about music, ambition, and connection. Dissonance and harmony The Mendelssohn Octet rehearsals became the highlight of Benedict's week. Watching Nora lead the small ensemble revealed new dimensions of her musicality. She directed with subtle gestures and meaningful glances rather than dominating the group, creating space for each musician to contribute while maintaining a cohesive interpretation. "Your approach is fascinating," Benedict told her after one particularly successful rehearsal. "You lead without imposing." Nora tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Music isn't about control. It's conversation." "Perhaps I could learn from that philosophy," he admitted. Their professional relationship had evolved into something approaching friendship. They often discussed interpretations after rehearsals, sometimes continuing their conversations over coffee or early dinners. Benedict found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet wisdom and unexpected humor. The other musicians noticed the change in their conductor. His legendary temper had softened. His feedback, while still exacting, now came with patience rather than condescension. Several attributed this transformation to Nora's influence. "You've humanized the tyrant," Dominic teased her one afternoon. "He was never a tyrant," Nora replied, "just passionate." "And you're defending him now," Dominic observed with raised eyebrows. "Interesting." Nora changed the subject, uncomfortable with the implication. 3 weeks before the chamber music concert, Nora invited Benedict to her apartment for dinner. "I'd like to show you something," she said, uncharacteristically hesitant. Benedict arrived with an expensive bottle of wine, surprised by his own nervousness. Nora's apartment was smaller than he expected, but filled with character, walls lined, with bookshelves, vintage concert posters, and a beautiful upright piano. "This is you," he realized, examining a faded photograph of a teenage girl performing on a grand stage. "My Carnegie Hall debut," she confirmed. "I was 16. After a simple but delicious meal, Nora led him to the piano. "I've been composing since my sister's illness," she explained, sorting through handwritten scores. "It began as therapy, but evolved into something more." Benedict sat beside her on the bench, their shoulders nearly touching. "May I hear something?" Nora hesitated, then placed her hands on the keys. "This is called Restoration." The piece began with sparse, melancholy notes that gradually developed into complex harmonies. Benedict watched her face as she played, struck by the transformation. The reserved woman disappeared, replaced by someone radiating pure emotional intensity. The music built to a powerful climax before resolving into a peaceful, hopeful conclusion. When she finished, Benedict sat in stunned silence. "It's unrefined," she said quickly, misinterpreting his reaction. "It's brilliant," he countered. "Nora, this deserves to be heard," she shook her head. "It's personal, not for public consumption." "Art this meaningful should be shared," Benedict insisted. "The symphony could premiere it. I could orchestrate it with your guidance." "No," she said firmly. "I'm not ready for that." "Why not? You've already proven your abilities as a performer. Why hide this other gift?" Nora stood abruptly. "Because some things are meant to be kept private. Not everything needs an audience, Benedict." "That's fear talking," he challenged. "The same fear that's kept you in the second violin section for 13 years. Her expression hardened. "You still don't understand. Not everything is about ambition or recognition. Some music exists simply for the joy of creation, or because it's safer to hide than to risk judgment," Benedict countered. "And you would know all about judgment, wouldn't you?" Nora's voice gained a rare edge. "The great Benedict Fraser, who dismissed me for months without a second thought." Benedict flinched as if struck. "That was before I knew you." "Exactly. You judged me without knowing me." She crossed her arms. "Now you're judging my choices without understanding them." "I'm trying to understand," he said, frustration coloring his tone. "But I see extraordinary talent being wasted, and it baffles me." "Wasted?" Nora's eyes flashed. "Because I'm not chasing accolades?" Because I find fulfillment in teaching children rather than performing for dignitaries? That's your definition of waste? Benedict ran a hand through his hair. That's not what I meant. It is, she insisted. You still measure success by recognition and position. I measure it by impact and personal fulfillment. The tension between them crackled like static electricity. Benedict struggled to articulate his feelings without sounding condescending. I just want others to experience what I did when I heard you play, he said finally. It was transcendent. Nora's expression softened slightly. I appreciate that. But my music is mine to share or withhold as I choose. Benedict nodded, accepting her boundary even as he disagreed with it. I should go. At the door, he turned back. For what it's worth, I think you're the bravest musician I've ever met. Brave? She echoed, surprised. It takes courage to choose your own path, especially when it's not the one others expect. He smiled ruefully. Even if that choice drives perfectionists like me to distraction. The comment broke the tension. Nora's laugh was soft but genuine. Good night, Benedict. The next week brought new complications. The symphony board, impressed by Nora's emergency performance, suggested featuring her as a soloist in the upcoming season. Benedict supported the idea enthusiastically, but Nora refused. This is professional suicide, Benedict told her after. She declined the offer. Soloists wait years for opportunities like this. I've made my decision, she said firmly. Their disagreement affected their working relationship. During orchestra rehearsals, Benedict found himself watching Nora more than necessary, frustrated by her self-imposed limitations. She, in turn, withdrew into professional politeness, the growing warmth between them replaced by careful distance. The tension peaked during the final rehearsal for the chamber concert. Benedict attended as an observer, unable to resist making suggestions about the interpretation. When he interrupted Nora's direction for the third time, she set down her violin. Maestro, she said, reverting to formality, either conduct this rehearsal or allow me to do so. We can't have two leaders. Benedict flushed, aware of the other musicians watching uncomfortably. Of course, please continue. He left shortly after, recognizing that his presence was counterproductive. That evening, he paced his penthouse, replaying their interactions. Why did her choices frustrate him so deeply? Why couldn't he simply accept her decisions as she had asked? The answer came to him slowly, reluctantly, because he had developed feelings for Nora that went far beyond professional admiration or friendship. Somewhere between her emergency performance and their dinner, she had become essential to him, not just as a musician, but as a woman whose quiet strength and hidden depths fascinated him. And perhaps he realized with growing clarity, he feared that if she continued to hide her gifts, she would also hide her heart, from him and from the connection that seemed to be forming between them. The night before the chamber concert, Benedict made a decision. He would respect her choices, even if he didn't fully understand them. Some harmonies took time to resolve, and Nora Jenkins was a composition far more complex than any he had ever encountered. Final movement. The chamber music concert arrived on a perfect autumn evening. The intimate recital hall was filled to capacity, word having spread about the second violinist who had stunned the audience as a last-minute soloist months earlier. Benedict sat in the front row, program in hand. He hadn't spoken to Nora outside of necessary professional interactions for nearly 2 weeks. Their disagreement had created a gulf between them that neither knew how to bridge. The lights dimmed, and the octet took their places. Nora wore a simple, black dress, her hair arranged in an elegant twist rather than her usual practical bun. She acknowledged the audience with a small nod before raising her violin. From the first notes of Mendelssohn's octet, Benedict was transported. Nora led the ensemble with subtle authority, her interpretation bringing new life to the familiar piece. The other musicians responded to her guidance, creating a performance that flowed with organic unity. During the third movement, Benedict noticed something extraordinary. Nora was playing with her eyes closed, a serene smile touching her lips. She wasn't performing for the audience. She was simply making music for the pure joy of it, allowing others to witness her private communion with Mendelssohn's genius. In that moment, understanding dawned. Nora's approach to music wasn't about hiding or fear. It was about preserving the sacred relationship between artist and art. She had found a way to share her gift without sacrificing its personal meaning on the altar of public acclaim. After thunderous applause and 3 curtain calls, Benedict made his way backstage. He found Nora in a quiet corner, carefully placing her violin in its case. "That was magnificent," he said softly. She turned, her expression guarded. "Thank you." "I owe you an apology," Benedict continued. "I've been trying to make you conform to my understanding of what a musician should be, rather than appreciating who you actually are." Nora's posture relaxed slightly. "And who am I, Benedict?" "Someone who understands something about music that I'm only beginning to grasp." He stepped closer. "That true artistry isn't about recognition or position. It's about connection, to the music, to oneself, to others." "Yes," she said simply. "I have something for you." Benedict handed her an envelope. "Please, open it now." Inside was a letter from the board outlining a new position created specifically for Nora, artist in residence for community engagement. The role would allow her to develop programs bringing classical music to schools, hospitals, and underserved communities while maintaining her place in the orchestra. "This isn't a spotlight," Benedict explained. "It's a channel for your gifts that respects your values. No required solo performances, though the option remains open." Nora read the letter carefully, emotion playing across her features. "You arranged this?" "I suggested it." The board embraced the idea immediately. He hesitated. "I also have a personal request." "Yes? Would you consider allowing me to hear more of your compositions?" When she began to protest, he added quickly, "Not to pressure you to publish or perform them, simply because they moved me deeply, and I'd like to understand that part of you better." The vulnerability in his request was new. Nora studied him, seeing past the polished exterior to the man beneath, a man who was, perhaps for the first time in his distinguished career, questioning his fundamental assumptions about music and success. "I'd like that," she said finally, "though I should warn you that my most recent piece is rather personal." "Oh?" Benedict raised an eyebrow. "It's called The Conductor's Revelation." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "It may be somewhat autobiographical." Benedict's heart quickened. "I look forward to hearing it. Perhaps over dinner tomorrow?" "I'd prefer tonight," Nora said with unexpected boldness. "I've prepared a late supper at my apartment. If you're available." The invitation hung between them, weighted with significance. "I'm available," Benedict replied softly. 3 hours later, they sat side by side at Nora's piano. The remains of their meal had been cleared away, a half-empty bottle of wine stood on the coffee table, and the apartment was lit by the warm glow of scattered lamps. Nora's composition began with commanding, almost imperious chords that gradually yielded to a questioning melody. The piece evolved through sections of conflict and resolution, ultimately transforming into something rich and harmonious. 2 distinct voices finding unexpected beauty in their combination. As the final notes faded, Benedict turned to her. "Is that how you see me? How you see us?" "It's how I see possibilities," Nora answered. "The question is whether you do." "I see them more clearly now than ever before." Benedict gently touched her cheek. "You've changed how I understand music." "Nora, And in doing so, you've changed me. For the better, I hope, she whispered. Undoubtedly. His smile held a hint of self-deprecation. Though I suspect the transformation isn't complete. Old habits die hard. I wouldn't want to change everything. About you, Nora admitted. Your passion for excellence, your dedication, those qualities make you who you are. They just needed tempering, and you've provided that balance. Benedict's hand moved to cover hers on the piano keys. Would you consider continuing to do so? Not just professionally, but personally as well? Nora turned her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. I believe that could be arranged, Maestro. Benedict, he corrected with a smile. Benedict, she echoed, leaning toward him. Their first kiss was gentle, a tentative exploration that deepened as they found their harmony. When they finally parted, Benedict rested his forehead against hers. I never expected to find you, he murmured. I was looking in all the wrong places for all the wrong things. Sometimes the most profound discoveries happen when we stop looking, Nora replied. 6 months later, the Philadelphia Symphony premiered a new work, Duet for Hidden Voices, composed by Nora Jenkins and orchestrated by Benedict Fraser. The piece told the story of two musicians, one seeking recognition, one seeking meaning, who discovered that each held what the other needed. Nora did not perform as a soloist that night. Instead, she sat in her usual place with the second violins, content in her choice. But as Benedict conducted her composition, their eyes met repeatedly across the orchestra, each gaze an intimate conversation that needed no words. Critics hailed the piece as a revelation, a perfect marriage of technical brilliance and emotional authenticity. What they couldn't know was that the true masterpiece wasn't on the printed page or in the performance, but in the relationship that had inspired it. After the standing ovation, as the audience filed out of the concert hall, Benedict and Nora remained behind. In the quiet space where their journey had begun, he took her hand. Ready to go home? He asked. Nora smiled, the confidence she once reserved for private moments now visible for anyone who truly looked. I think I already am. Together they walked out into the night, their separate melodies now woven into a single, continuing composition, one that would evolve and deepen with each passing year, creating harmonies neither could have imagined alone.